So good evening, everyone. Tonight, we are going to continue our discussion of Ruth, of the book of Ruth. There are a couple of things I did want to address, which I think I did not address last time. One is that, that of course, in the first chapter that we read in our last class, we have Naomi telling Ruth telling both women, actually, go back, right? You should leave. Don't come with me. And that's taken as an indication that a prospective convert should be turned away 3 times. We see this actually in the Midrash, in Ruth Rabbah. Because I'm mentioning Ruth Rabbah, the Midrash, just a note about the rabbis, right? So if you're familiar, in general, every book has a Midrash Rabbah, a larger Midrash that is connected to that book. And we frequently think of the Rabbah, I'm going to call them the rabbis, we frequently think of this group of Midrashim as all being written and composed and collected at the same time. Nothing could be further from the truth. They're from different times. They have a different nature. Ruth Rabbah is kind of a collection that seems to be from different places. Whereas, for example, Breshit Rabbah is relatively early. Shmot Rabbah, Exodus Rabbah, is so late that Rashi probably didn't have it. That's how late that Midrash is. It's a very late Midrash. If you ever read any Midrashim from Shmot Rabbah, from Exodus Rabbah, they're really constructed like sermons. That's because they're a late Midrash of the full literary form. Whereas Breshit Rabbah are much shorter little Midrashim on the verses, and you're going to have a lot of Midrashim specifically on the beginning of a Babylonian parsha or the beginning of an Eretz Israeli Seder, because still that is what you would be talking about. You'd start with the beginning, and then that's what everyone would be saying kind of rabbinic sayings about, like in the Midrash. And here we're talking about Ruth Rabbah brings this idea that Naomi turns Ruth away three times to be an indication that that is what one should do with potential converts. Again, this idea that Ruth is the quintessential good convert, right? She is the perfect person, right? And she is kind of the proof that converts are good, or the ideal convert is good, right? Is that she joins the people and is an exemplary member. And we're going to see this idea continue in our current chapter. So let's take a look. I'm going to share my screen. Before I start, are there any questions left over from the last class, or anything I didn't address that someone has a burning need for me to address now? I'm perfectly happy to. Anything? No. So in our last, yes?
I'm still not clear on the fact that the style of Ruth seems to be very much in keeping with the earlier books, the
Yes.
books of the Nevi'im, and not in the style of the later books of the Ketuvim, like Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther and Daniel.
Okay, so I want to stop you there. I would put Ezra and Nehemiah in one group and Esther and Daniel in a different group. I think Esther and Daniel would normally, in terms of the language, in terms of their context, be considered much later and from a different milieu than Ezra and Nehemiah, right? Now, it's certainly true that I would say that the way Ruth is written, it is written in a way that you can kind of read it together with the book of Shoftim, with the book of Judges, which is when it's placing itself in that period of time. And you can read it, the language works. Others can point to Aramisms, etc., that the book may have, but I do think the language, in terms of the rhythm and in terms of the way it's written, does kind of work with those books. But if you read, let's say, the prophetic books of the Return to Zion, so I do think that you could say, well, this could be a book written in the Return to Zion. That's where, like, I wouldn't necessarily place it as late as Nehemiah, right? It wouldn't have to be, right? But I would say that it does make sense. It does make a certain amount of sense, even in terms of the language, that you could still write a book like that in the Return to Zion. Esther and Daniel, honestly, the way they're written and their whole kind of context of being kind of court stories of the Jew in the diaspora is a whole different kind of set. And then the Daniel going off into these kind of crazy prophecies, Esther having this kind of political palace intrigues. Those I would maybe put them together, but I put them very, very far from the Book of Ruth, where these are clearly Esther and Daniel are clearly coming from a place of like, let's talk about the diaspora, right? Or let's at least reflect what it means to be a Jew in the diaspora, at least in terms of the court stories of Daniel, maybe not the second half of Daniel. But and here we're very much in this world where what matters is the land of Israel and specific, and in our case, Judea, right? That is where our center is. And there is almost no recognition. It's true that there's no recognition that there's a viable Jewish community in the diaspora, right? We're very much centered of they went to Moab and they came back to Judea. There's nowhere else, right? There's nothing, no kind of recognition of anything outside it. Certainly it's being written as something that could be happening during the Book of Judges, right? It's certainly being written as meant to be at a time when that is where all Israelites live, right? All Israelites live in this land. And again, it's very, very peaceful for the period of the Judges. But of course, period of the Judges, you don't know how long you have peace for really, because everything's in those kind of typographic numbers, like 40 years, 40 years of quiet or 70 years. Like, and so it's hard to know how long you would have a time of quiet. I agree that the Book of Ruth reads very nicely, like it very nicely fits into those books. It doesn't, you don't get a jarring kind of feeling of, oh, wait, the verses read differently or anything like that. The language feels similar. And so it's more, and again, if you said to me, okay, it does though seem to be reacting to a different attitude towards, are we okay with foreign women joining the people of Israel, or are we not okay with it? Can a foreign woman legitimately join the people of Israel and it be a good thing, right? And that seems to be a big part of this book and what this book wants to prove, that again, a quote unquote foreign woman can join the people of Israel, and it could be a very good thing, and she could fit in with the people. And again, this is specific. It's significant that we're specifically seeing this with a Moabite woman, because and we talked about this in our last class, because we have the story after Bilam is supposed to curse Israel, we have the kind of straying with Moabite women. The Moabite women lead the Israelites astray and cause them to worship idols. And here's a woman who couldn't be further from that. She is not, she is modest. She has complete allegiance to the God of Israel, as we'll see, and a complete desire to fit in with how Israelites do things. So are there any other questions before we dive in? Okay, so we will dive in.
One more question.
Sure.
If Ruth had been male rather than female, a male Moabite, would that, even if he was good and everything, would he have been permitted to?
That is an excellent question. And it feels like maybe not. Like it feels like, particularly since he's a Moabite. Like, look, let's again, I'm not sure I don't think you were at the last class, but there's in the Torah, it says that a Moabite cannot be included, cannot join. Oh, you were, okay. So cannot join the people of Israel for 10 generations. And then rabbinically, that's interpreted as, well, only men. Men who are descendant of Moabites up to 10 generations, and up to 10 generations really means kind of forever, because they're not going to be able to trace it that farther than 10 generations. They cannot enter into Israel, but women can, right? That's the rabbinic interpretation of it, of course, also in light of the book of Ruth. So it is significant that we're talking very much, and the book remains very focused on female characters, okay? We're talking about women here, and we're talking about what women need to do and how women join the people of Israel. Whereas Ruth herself is constantly talking about how she's foreign, the fact is she has a family connection and a land connection to Israel that a man would not have if he were trying to join the people of Israel, because she was married to a Judean, an Israelite, and through him she has a hold on the land, on his inherited land. And of course, she has a familial connection to Naomi, who she has said, I will now connect myself to you, right? I married your son, but you are now, essentially, I'm now your daughter, right? And the same situation could not be easily said about a man in that, because a man would not be able to say, okay, now I get the land because I married a woman. It wouldn't work that way. So it's very much something that works for women and not necessarily for men, what we're seeing here. And it's not addressed though. It's not addressed, it's not hinted to. No one says, well, if she were a man. The fact that she's a woman, and that's what we're talking about. The fact is also in the ancient world, I mean, to a certain extent, this is true today as well, but in the ancient world, whereas we say, oh yes, Judaism is matrilineal, but in general, in the ancient world, you belong to whoever your husband's or your man's people were, that's who you belong to. In other words, whoever, it went by the man, right? I mean, we see that. I mean, let's face it, Yehuda he marries Bathshua, the Canaanite woman, right? And that is not, whereas a generation before that it seemed that would be impossible. He shouldn't do that, but he does that and no one says, boo, it's not a problem. It's not a problem with his children in theory. So there is this idea that whoever the man is, that is what kind of determines that is in general, like there are exceptions also in the Torah where we see that someone who, remember the son of the Egyptian man who curses God in the camp and then he gets executed, right? So there you see someone who his father is not of the tribe and yet he kind of belongs to Israel and he gets the punishment that would be coming to an Israelite for what he does. So we do see that a little bit, but in general, you wouldn't expect a man, right? And again, this is if we're talking about ancient Israel and possibly the return to Zion. Later on in the Hellenistic period, there absolutely were men who wanted to connect themselves to the Jewish people in some way, right? They didn't necessarily want to get circumcised, right? That's a pretty big barrier to entry. Right? But we know of men who connected themselves to the Jewish community, right? Even without going all the way, let's say, right? And then there were, of course, later on, there were actual, complete converts. And there were some probably who converted as well. By converting, I mean they actually went through with circumcision, even though probably the majority of them did not want to go that far. So certainly in the Hellenistic period, we have that. And earlier, like in the Hasmonean period, the Hasmoneans themselves forcibly convert, right? Peoples that they conquer, specific peoples that they conquer. So once we're in the Hasmonean period, then you have converts, like people who have converted and they're like, okay, they're converts, right? So the Idumeans are converts. They're a class of, and it's interesting because they've kind of been forced to convert, and so there's an interesting relationship to what they are, but in general they seem to be accepted. In other words, their status is considered okay. You were converted. If you're men, they went through circumcision, and now you're Jews. So Herod his father is Idumean and his mother is Nabatean, but his father is an Idumean who was converted. And so Herod can consider himself a Jew, as it were, right? Okay, so now let us.
Not to mention the fact that his father also married a Nabatean princess.
That's what I just said. Yeah, she's a Nabatean.
Yeah, right. And but okay, I think, but unlike him, she voluntarily accepted Judaism, unlike him who had.
Well, what do we know about? Do we know that? Do we know anything about what she accepted or didn't accept? I don't think we do. Do we? I don't think we have any sort of proof of what she accepted. We just know who she married, right?
Josephus has nothing to say about that. I'm not sure.
I don't know. Josephus is not a big fan of Herod, so I doubt he would be saying great things about his mother. But I would have to look into it. The truth is, I don't remember. I think he does make comments about his mother, but I don't think they're positive. I'll have to go back and look.
Anyway, just getting back to our discussion of Ruth, I would assume that whoever it was who wrote the book of Ruth knew the Chumash very, very well.
Oh yes, we're going to be talking about that now. Yeah.
And
yes.
The basic attitude that you see here, I mean, the Chumash makes no bones about it that an Israelite woman must not marry a non-Israelite man, and an Israelite man must not marry an Israelite woman. The Chumash is very, very clear about that, and the book clearly shows that, or clearly seems to think that the fact that these Israelite men married Moabite women was not a good thing. But on the other,
it really depends on interpretation, because you could, and I'm going far here. Okay? I'm not saying, oh, this is the only interpretation. You could read the Pentateuch, right, the 5 books of Moses, and say you can't move into an area in Canaan and marry the women en masse because they're going to bring you closer to idol worship, right? That's the explanation. But if you meet a specific woman who's really virtuous and she's not going to bring you to idol worship, well, then what's the problem? The whole point of not marrying the women of the place is because they're going to make you worship idols. That's what they're going to cause you to do. But here there's this woman and she's like, I'm going to worship God. And then what's the problem? So you could do that. You could go on that path and interpret it that way. And I would assume there are people who are interpreting that way. Even if you look at Ezra and Nehemiah, I believe it's in Nehemiah where he's talking about how horrible it is that these men are marrying like these Ashdodi women. And he's like, and their kids can only speak Ashdodi. Their kids can't even speak Hebrew, right? And that's the big thing, is that it's not just that they're marrying these women, it's that they're marrying these women and kind of not staying Jewish, quote unquote, right? And that's part of it. It's not like, I don't think that for Nehemiah that's it, right? I'm not saying that, but I am saying that very possibly for some people who are doing this, say, well, but she's different, right? And that's the argument in Ruth. Well, she's different. Ruth is someone who's accepting God. There's not even an inkling that she's going to bring anyone to idol worship, right? So that's the issue there. Women marrying out to men, that's a whole different thing, because a woman in Judaism, if she's married, or in an Israelite woman, if she marries a man outside of the Israelite, she's leaving, right? And then so that's probably the debate that's going on, right? The debate that's going on is it a universal injunction that no one can marry any Gentile woman, or is it an injunction that when you come to the land, you should not assimilate? You should not assimilate, because if you marry all these women, you will assimilate to that culture and you will start worshiping foreign gods. So that's probably what the argument is in the most basic terms, given that if everyone's reading the same text. If everyone's reading the same text, then that would be the argument, right? Now, the fact is, there are indications that they're not reading the same text, because one of the things you get in Ezra and Nehemiah is that they hear these texts and then they start crying, and they're like, or I may be getting it mixed up, because sometimes they cry, sometimes they don't cry, but they're like, oh my God, we've done the wrong thing. Why? Because now they're reading, they're not supposed to marry foreign women, right? So the question is, how well did people know these texts? Now, honestly, in this chapter, and we've got to jump in because we don't have that much time, in this chapter, we are going to see that there are absolutely a recognition of the Torah and of the text of the Torah. So let's jump in and read our current chapter, and we'll see in terms of how familiar they are with the Torah text. Okay, so just as a reminder, where were we? We were oh, now it's lost. Hold on just a moment. This happens sometimes with Sepharia, with Sepharia, when you there we go. Okay, when you scroll, it doesn't always scroll correctly. Okay, so here we are. We're in chapter 2, Perek Bet of Ruth. Okay, now where did we end with Ruth and Naomi? Is that they returned. Ruth is together with Naomi. All the women came and greeted her. They said, "Is this Naomi?" And she said, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, bitter, because God has taken everything away from me." And yet it ended with an optimistic note that the harvest is starting. The harvest is starting. A, there's food now, right? The famine is over. And B, this is in the harvest are the beginnings of what will be the salvation for Naomi and Ruth. Okay, so Naomi is, and so we start here. Naomi modali isha ish gibor chayil mimishpachat Elimelech ushmo Boaz. So Naomi had a relative through her husband. Okay, and that's important because it's got to be through her husband because the field is coming through her husband. Her portion comes through her husband. A man of a mighty man, a good man from the family of Elimelech, and his name is Boaz. This is just to give us a little preview. Okay, now we're going to go back into the action. Now, at this point, Naomi's at a low point, and so the person who's going to take action is Ruth. Okay, Naomi is not doing anything. She came bitter, and they're sitting there, and they don't have food. So Ruth the Moabite, right? Ruth the Moabite says to Naomi, "Elchana hasadeh v'alakata b'shibolim, achar asher emsa chen be'inav, v'tomer la l'chi beiti." She said, I'm going to go now to the field, and I'm going to collect things from among the ears of grain, so that following someone who maybe will like me. In other words, following behind someone who will let me go behind him and glean, right? And she said, "Okay, go, my daughter." She doesn't know where she's going to go. She's going to go in a field. We're going to see later the risks that Ruth is taking as a young woman going to glean in the field when she doesn't know anyone, right? And so she went and she came and she gleaned the field. You know, so it's usually saying there's a lot of action here. She's taking action because you have verb, right? She went, she came, and she grew. She didn't let grass grow. Achrei hakotzrim, behind the reapers. Vayiker mikreha chelkat hasadeh levoaz Hashem yishpach elach. And it just so happened. It just so happened that the portion, the field that she went to was Boaz's field, right? Who's from the Elimelech's family. Here we see, we talked about this last time, here we see this idea of God being behind this story, right? Here everyone mentions God. It's not like Esther where the name of God isn't mentioned. The name of God here is mentioned all the time. So everyone's recognizing God, but we also see that God is behind this because she just so happens to go to exactly the right field. Okay, and another thing that we need to point out here, and I've talked about in general, kind of the kindness and how everyone's acting correctly in this story, right? Or more than correctly, they're being kinder than they need to be, okay? So what are the laws, the biblical laws that mean that a poor woman can go and glean in someone else's field? Let's take a look. Okay, so here we have in Vayikra, in Leviticus 19, Yutet, and we're going to read here. This is pe'ah, right? This is the idea that you don't reap your entire field. You leave things on the edges, okay? And you don't, so it says, Uvekutzrechem et kitzir artechem. When you reap the harvest of your land. Lo tichaleh pa'atzadcha litzor. You don't reap all the way to the edges, right, of the field, the corners of the field, the edges of the field. V'leket kitzircha lo tilakeh. And don't gather kind of everything that you have in the harvest. Okay. V'chamecha lo te'olel, v'feret kamecha lo tilakeh. And again, this is the same thing you should do with your vineyard. You shouldn't pick absolutely everything. Le'ani v'lager ta'zovotam. Okay. You should leave it for the poor person and the stranger. Okay, remember that ger in the Chumash, in the Pentateuch, is not a convert. He is a person who's living among you who's not from your nation. Okay. I am the Lord your God. And frequently when we see I am the Lord your God, this is frequently something that it is stated when you could do this in secret. In other words, you could not do this and no one would notice. I am the Lord your God, you better do this, right? I know this, okay? So you need to do this. Let's look at some other, and then also in Leviticus, in Vayikra, Chaf Gimel 23. Okay, I think here we are, over here, right? This is just a 23-22. Chaf Gimel Chaf Bet. Uvekutzrechem et ksir artechem lo techaleh pa'atzadcha bekutzrecha v'leket ksircha lo tlaket le'ani v'lager ta'zovotam ani. Again, and I'll again ending with I'm Lord your God. Again, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shouldn't reap out to you shouldn't reap the entire thing. You should leave the edges. And you shouldn't collect all of the gleanings of your harvest. In other words, this is exactly what we're just talking about. She's going to go back behind the reapers. They're going to kind of collect what they easily collect, and they're going to let her kind of gather what's left. All right. And here we have in Devarim, in Deuteronomy. Okay. This is what we have. We call shichecha. That if you forget something, you don't go back for it. Okay. And this is a little bit different because this is with sheaves. All right, so when you're talking about, before you were talking about like individual stocks that she's gathering behind the reapers, right? Because they're collecting it, she's gathering individual stocks, or she's picking herself on the edges of the field. And here we're talking about, what if okay, you do a harvest and you forget a sheaf in the field, okay, a collected bundle, right? Lo tashuv lekachto, you should not go back to take it. Lager leyatom v'la'almanah, this is going to be for the stranger, let's call them the stranger, and the orphan and the widow. Leman yivarecha Hashem Elokecha b'chol ma'aseh yadecha, and so that the Lord your God will bless you in everything you do. And again here. Now, I want to remind you, so why is the stranger grouped together? The other in Leviticus, the stranger is grouped with the poor person. Here they're grouped with the orphan and the widow. They're frequently grouped with the orphan and the widow. Why? Because in the ancient world, who looks after you? Who makes sure you get justice? Who makes sure that you're taken care of? Your family. Your family are the ones who make sure that the system takes care of you. There is a system, but you need someone to advocate for you, and that's your family. You belong to your family. So in a court of law, they will come and they'll come and support you, or they'll come and argue for it. If you have no food, they will feed you, right? Even if you're hopefully a distant relative, even perhaps not, right? We'll see. But if you are a widow, or if you're not talking about a distant, I correct myself. We're not really talking about a distant family. We're talking about an immediate family. An orphan, a widow, a stranger from a nation. These people don't have family here to look out for them. Okay, and so for these people, you who have a field, you must allow for them to eat. You must help them support themselves. Okay, so let's go back now to our chapter, and we'll see what's going on here. So what she's doing is she's doing the gleaning thing. She's doing leket, right? She's collecting what's left behind the reapers. Okay. So she comes to Boaz's field and she does that. In fact, she goes behind the reapers and she collects. All right. V'hinei, oops, here we are. V'hinei Boaz ba mibet lechem, vayomer lekotrim Adonai imachem, vayomer lo yivarechecha Adonai. So here everyone is talking about God constantly. They all know, it's all very clear who they worship, right? I just want to, and it's making very clear. It's a very pastoral kind of, the whole book is very calm. It's a time of peace. And everyone is of one mind in terms of how you behave and who you worship and what you do. V'hinei Boaz ba mi Beit Lechem. So Boaz is coming from Bethlehem, and he says to the reapers, "May the Lord be with you." And they say to him, "May the Lord bless you." Right? Standard greetings. He's coming. It's not. She started at dawn when they started reaping. He owns the field. He doesn't have to come at dawn. He's coming to check up on the reapers later in the day. Okay. Vayomer Boaz l'naro hanitzava kotrim l'mi hanara azot. So Boaz says to his servant, who is appointed over the reapers, he's kind of the overseer. He says, "Whose is that girl?" In other words, who does she belong to? You could say either he assumes that she's someone's servant, or you could say what family does she belong to? Who is she connected to? Vayan hanar hanitzava al kotrim vayomar nara moaviyah hi hashava im Naomi mistei Moav. And he says to this young man who is the overseer, he says that she's a Moabite young woman who came back with Naomi from the fields of Moab. In other words, everyone knows about this and about what Ruth has done for Naomi and that she returned with Naomi. Okay, so this is something that everyone kind of not just that she's a Moabite girl, which one assumes that probably people could figure out from speaking with her, but that they know the whole story because it's such an unusual thing that she came back with Naomi. Vatomer, and he's explaining, this is what she said to me. This is filling in information we didn't know. Vatomer alakatana vasafti bomarim achrei hakotzrim vatavo b'tamon me'az haboker b'ad ata ze shifta habayit mat. And he said, he says she asked permission, something that, by the way, we know she didn't really have to do because they have to let poor people gather in the field. He said she asked permission. She said, can I please gather and gather among the sheaves, right, behind the reapers? And she's been standing here since the morning. She sat maybe a little bit of time in the hut where I'm overseeing, but she's been just working straight. But Yomer Boaz, he's pointing out she has permission and she's working really hard and everyone knows that she's doing this not just for herself, but for Naomi, because everyone knows her story. Vayomer Boaz al Ruth, halo shamat biti halo shamat biti. Al tachi lokot b'sadeh acher v'gam la tavuri mizeh v'chotiv b'kin im naratai. So Boaz says to Ruth, listen to me, my daughter. Don't go to gather in another field and don't pass away from there. You stay with my girls, in other words, my servant girls. In other words, don't stick with the men, right? And I'm reading Zakovitz, but Zakovitz is you can't really see it. Zakovitz is Mikral Yisrael versus Zakovitz wants to say that he actually is saying, you're not even going to spend time with me. I just want to make sure you get food. So stick with the girls because I'm not going to be there. But we see that Boaz is kind of with Ruth later. So I don't think it doesn't really hold, but it does seem to say, he's saying, look, be in a protected place. Don't be with the young men. You don't have to walk right after the reapers. Stay with the maidservants and you can collect there. You have my permission and stay here, stay in this field. A knife, okay, just watch. Esther, I see that you have a question. Just a second. Just watch the field where they're reaping and go after them. And I have already told my young men not to touch you. There are two possibilities of what he means by not to touch you. He might be saying, I'm telling them not to prevent you from going because you're not going to be following them right away. You're going to be seeing where there's something to gather. Or she's a young woman, they're young men, And he told them, do not bug her, do not bother this young one, okay, which seems to be the case. Vitsamit, now he's going to go further. We read the rule. The rule is that you let poor people gather wheat, barley, whatever from your fields. You don't have to support them though. So here he's saying you're going to get water with my workers, you're going to be able to drink. And anyone who lives in this part of the world knows that that's a really big deal. The water is not so automatic, and it's a big deal to have a source of water that's provided to you. So he says, if you're thirsty, you can go to where the jars of water are, and you can drink from the water that the men have drawn. In other words, they're doing labor to drink to draw water. You can drink that water. Just a second, Esther, I'll get to you in just a moment. But and she fell on her face and she and bowed to the ground, and she said to him, how have I found favor in your eyes to recognize me, and I am a stranger, I'm a foreigner. And note the play on words, lahakireni vanochi nochria, to, it's the reverse, right? It's the reverse. You hakireni nochria, you recognize me despite the fact that I am foreign, right? Esther, you had a question.
Actually, I didn't, and I don't know what I pressed, but I got rid of it.
Okay, good. Okay, cool. All right, so on we go. Okay, and so Boaz answers, "Vayam Boaz vayomer la, hugad li, kol asher asiti chamotzach." And he says, he's saying, I've been really told, right? I've been told and told again of everything you've done for your mother-in-law. After your husband died, and you left your father and mother and the land of your birth, and you'll know and you'll go to a nation that you didn't know yesterday and the day before. And of course, here we actually see an actual language parallel to what? Anyone remember? To Lech Lecha, right? To the commandment of God to Abraham, right? Lech Lecha me'artecha u'mimoladetecha u'mibeit avicha el ha'aretz asher areka. Go from your land. Let's find this here. Go from your land, right? From your land of your birth, right? And from the house of your father to the land that I will show you, right? So this actually does seem to be as opposed to before when we talked about how the argument for Ruth was not, it came up last week that I don't think that this is an actual reaction to the text of Ezra Nehemiah. Here we seem to see a link to the text of Genesis of Breshit in Lech Lecha, where Avram is commanded to go to the land of Canaan, to Canaan. So here we actually see this kind of idea that she, like Avram, is left her father and mother, and she went to a new land. And this again is part of her accepting God and being worthy of being part of the people of Israel. And he says, Yishalem Adonai palech v'tihi maskortech shlema me'im Adonai Elohei Yisrael asher bat lachasot tachat knafav. So may God reward your deeds. May He give you a full recompense is good. Full recompense from the Lord God of Israel, that you came to take shelter under His wings. Okay, and we see how Boaz is presenting it here. You've left everything and you've come to shelter with whom? Not with Naomi, but with God. You have come here, and by coming here, it is clear that what you are doing is you're seeking the shelter of God. So you are joining God's people. Okay, but Tomer, and she said, אמצא חן בעיניך אדוני כי ניחמתני, וכי דיברת על לב שפחתך, ואנוכי לא אהיה כאחת שפחותיך. Now, this is interesting. I'm going to actually go back a bit. So when she falls to the ground and she bows down, she is thanking him for this tremendous generosity, right? She's going to have a protected place to gather food. She's going to have a source of water the whole day, right? That she'll be able to drink. And now she'll be able to support herself and her mother-in-law. And that's what she's falling down for. Now she's thanking him for something different. I will say, I remember when you think about, like, you're like, what she's so grateful for, she's going to have to do work. She's going to have to collect everything. It reminds me a lot. I can't help but be reminded, if you, has anyone seen the book by Roman Vishniak, A Vanished World? Right, he went to Poland right before the Holocaust and took a lot of pictures, and then he would take a photo of something interesting, and then he would go and say, what's going on? Like, he would see something, he would say, this is interesting, he would take a photo, and then he would actually approach it and say, what's happening here? So there's a photo where there's this young boy, and he's speaking very earnestly to this older man who looks very kind of what do you call it? It's very he seems comfortable, okay? You know, he's in a coat with a hat, and and it turns out, what is this young man is an Eloi. He's a Gemara, he's a Talmudic genius, right? So he came to learn in the yeshiva. But so the yeshiva will take him for free, but he has to find his meals.
Miriam?
And so he's speaking to this. Yes, that's right. That's it. That's a Vanished World. Yeah, it's a fantastic book. I highly, highly recommend it. But if you're looking at the photos, read the descriptions in the back. And so he's speaking to this rich man to see if this rich man will provide him with some of his meals during the week, because he has to provide. This little kid has to make sure he gets his meals. And the rich man, I think, he promises him 2 meals a week, that he can come to him for dinner twice a week. And the young boy is so excited that he fainted, right? And it reminds us of what poverty is. And you can understand for Ruth how unbelievable it is that this man is taking her and saying, I will provide for you, as it were, and you will be unmolested and can glean in my field and have water. Then when he says, listen, you've come and you've left everything to be sheltered by God, by the God of Israel, and may God bless you. She says, and I'm reading now from Pasuk Gimel, verse 13. V'tomer emsa chen be'einecha Adoni ki nichamtani, v'chi dibarta al lev shivchatecha, v'nochi lo ehyeh ka'achat shivchotecha. She says, I found favor in your eyes, sir, because you have comforted me and you spoke to the heart of your maidservant. And I am not even like one of your maidservants. In other words, you have taken the time now to comfort me. You've spoken to my heart. You've seen me as a person. And this is another kindness, another level of kindness. And this goes again to the theme of the whole book, which is the idea that our heroes are the ones who are kind beyond what is expected. Everyone's doing what's expected. They're more than that. They go further in terms of kindness. And now we'll see another piece of kindness from Boaz. Vayomer la Boaz et ha'ochel. And so Boaz says to her, when the time for food comes, when it's time for everyone to eat, he says, Goshi halom v'achalt min halechem v'tavalt pitech v'chometz v'teshev mitzad ha'kotzrim. He says, come here and eat from the bread, right? And dip your bit of bread in vinegar. In other words, sit with everyone and eat with them. Sit next to the reapers. And so you'll get the bread that I'm providing for my workers. Vayitzbot la koli, v'tochal v'tispa v'totar. A koli is roasted grains. It's very quick and easy. It's a very good food to eat when you're reaping in the field, because you can make it very quickly. So you take some grain and you just like toast it, and then you can eat it. So he's not just toasting it. Now he's making her food. He toasts it and he's gathering it himself and he's giving it to her, right? So he keeps on going Now he's feeding her. Now he's feeding her himself. And he's feeding her a lot, right? Because it said, Vatochal, Vatisba, Vatotar. And she ate and she was satisfied and she had leftover. So he's really giving her, he's really serving her. He really wants to take care of her. And he's doing things to take care of her during this experience. Vatakam lelaket, vayitzav Boaz et na'arav lemor, gam ben ha'omarim talaket, velo tachlimuha. Okay, and she got up to gather, and Boaz said to his servants, saying, let her also gather, not just after the reapers, but let her gather between the bundled sheaves, okay? Which is not normally what she'd be able to do, because that's not where you would expect to get grain. V'gam shota sholula minetz batim, v'azavtem v'likta v'lo tigaruba. And so you should leave for her from among the heaps so she can go and she can collect them, right? And again, this is kind of a fake shikha. This is a fake, we forgot it, right? We forgot it, right? So that she can actually take, I'm not sure that it's talking about stocks here. It could actually be talking about like bundles, because it says if you forget a bundle, right, she can come and collect it. So that might be what it's talking about here. You should forget bundles. Forget some bundles so she can take, okay? But till I cake basadeh ad ha'arev, vatachbot et asher liketa. So she gathered it in the field till the evening, and she beat out, she wouldn't have had like a professional thing to separate, the chaff, but she beats it out with probably a stick or whatever, what she collected, because otherwise it's going to be very hard to take it home. An ephah, so she had an ephah of barley. How much is an ephah of barley? Between 15 and 25 kilo. Between 15 and 25 kilo, that's a lot, right? That's a lot. And it's going to last her and Naomi at least for a few days, right? So she really, really, really did well. But she came, she lifted and she brought it back to town. But and her mother-in-law saw what she gathered. But and so she also took out and gave her what the food that was left over. Remember the roasted grains that she had that was left over after she was satisfied. So not only did she bring back to her mother-in-law the stuff that she's worked hard all day gathering, she also brought her the food, everything that was left over from her lunch. And also what this makes very clear to Naomi is something weird happened here, right? How does she even have these roasted grains left over? Like what's going on? Something's going on here, okay? She didn't just gather, okay? So her mother-in-law says, where did you gather today and what did you do? Yehi makiref baruch, baruch. May the person who noticed you, who recognized you, may he be blessed, right? Because it's obvious that someone took care of her, quote unquote. But taged lachamota et asher asta imo. But Tomer Shem ha'ish asher asiti imo hayom Boaz. So she told her mother-in-law what she had. Essentially, the person that she had done with, she had worked alongside, and she said the name of this man that I was working with or doing with is Boaz. Today was Boaz. But Tomer Naomi, and now Naomi sees the light of the tunnel. Tomer Naomi l'chata. Baruch hu Hashem asher lo azav chasdo et hachayim ve'et hametim. And Naomi says to her daughter-in-law, may God be blessed, may the Lord be blessed, who does not forget or does not abandon his kindness with the living and the dead. Who are the dead that he's doing kindness with? Obviously, Naomi's dead husband and Ruth's dead husband, right? Because the idea is, as we're going to see later on, that this is going to be the path for there to be a continuity of the family with the field that Naomi still has in her portion. In other words, it's going to be continuity of the family with their portion in the land of Israel, okay? So it's a kindness, not just with the living, Ruth and Naomi, but also with the dead, their husbands. V'tomer la Naomi, Karov lanu ha'ish migo aleinu. She said the person he's related to us, he's one of our redeemers. Now we're going to talk in our next class about what that means to be a redeemer. Actually, maybe in 2 classes, we'll see what we get to. What it means to be a redeemer. Actually, no, next class. What it means to be a redeemer. Because this being a redeemer is not what we've seen elsewhere. So we've seen Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, when his cousin comes to him to redeem a field, what that means is the cousin's like, I have to sell, so I need a relative to buy for me. And that is redemption. When we have in the Torah, redemption is when someone's already sold their field. They've sold their field. It's not theirs at all anymore. And you need to buy it so it doesn't leave their possession entirely, and then it will come back to the family, right? That's neither of them is that, because here we have this connection to Ruth herself, as we'll see, that a marriage with Ruth and inheriting the field are intrinsically connected. We're going to talk when we get to that about why that could be, about one possibility to understand that, right? And it also doesn't connect with Yibum, with the rule of someone dies and without a child and his brother is supposed to marry his widow. That is not this, because there is no brother, right? And there is no actual requirement, right? Like the fact that Boaz marries Ruth is seen as a tremendous kindness. It's not something that someone can come and necessarily demand from him, is the way it's presented, okay? So we're going to talk more about how we can understand this later in this class, not tonight, but later in the class. And now we'll just kind of close the chapter. V'tomer Ruth HaMoaviyah gam ki amar elai im hana'arim asher li tidbakin ad im kilu et kol hakatzir asher li. And Ruth the Moabite says, he also said to me, she's kind of glossing over this whole idea of, he's our relative, he's our redeemer. She's just saying, he also said that stick with my young men until they finish the whole harvest. Now, Zakovitz says, and I like this a lot, he said what Ruth is kind of saying is, you know what, let's finish the harvest first. Let's right now, just let me keep going. I'll go to Boaz and finish the harvest. We can worry about this redemption thing later, right? Meanwhile, there's a harvest. We have a source. We have a place where I can get food. Let's stick with that until the end of the harvest. And Naomi accepts it. But Tomer Naomi Ruth Kalata. Naomi says to Ruth her Dharma, she's like, good, my daughter, that's good that you go out with his servant girls, and so that they don't kind of harm you, they don't bother you in another field. Again, we're reminded the fact that Ruth went out on her own to collect the field. On the one hand, she had no choice. There was no one else to go. Naomi's old. She's also lost all her kind of gumption until right now. We're seeing Naomi get some energy again. But when she came back, she wasn't doing anything. Ruth says, I'm going to go to the field. I'm going to collect. Oh, that's the only person who can do it. It's still a risky thing as a young woman to go and get a young, unconnected woman who by definition is helpless because you're poor and a widow. And she went to the fields to gather food because she had to. And that was risky. So Boaz made his move and said, stick with my girls. And Naomi said it's a good thing. Stick with his girls, and that way young men won't bother you, because that is a possibility. Okay. Now, a certain amount has been made, certainly in Midrash, the fact that she says when she's reporting what Boaz says to her, she says he told her to stick with his young men, and Naomi says, well, yes, it's good that you stick with his young women, right? And that she's kind of correcting because Ruth is. And the final analysis of Moabite, and she doesn't understand that she shouldn't be with the young men. Zakovitz wants to say that this is a mistake. It's a little hard to say it's a mistake. I mean, all the versions we have here in the Septuagint, it also says young men in this verse, right? It's very possible that what she's talking about is she is concentrating on the harvest, which the young men are really involved in. Remember, she's supposed to keep an eye on what the young men are doing, the reaping, and so she can gather stuff. And Naomi understands that what she's going to be doing is sticking with the young women because Boaz has given her his sponsorship, has kind of extended his protection. ותדבק בנערות בועז ללקט עד כלות קציר השעורים וקציר החיטים ותשב את חמותה. And in fact, she sticks with Boaz's young women, right, who are to gather until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. And then she stayed with her, and she stayed with her mother-in-law. She stayed with her mother-in-law. She doesn't leave her. She sticks with her mother-in-law the entire harvest, supporting both of them. Okay, so in fact, this is what happened. It isn't just that let me stop my share. It isn't just that she Ruth was like, hey, let's wait till the end of the harvest. They do wait till the end of the harvest. Throughout the harvest, we don't notice it so much if we're just reading it, you know, at early in the morning on Shavuot, especially if we've been up all night learning, then we really don't notice it. That this is not the whole scene with Boaz at night. That doesn't happen till the end of the harvest, right? She supports her mother-in-law through a harvest, working hard, with Boaz extending his protection over her to make sure that she brings money and that she's taken care of throughout that harvest period. Only at the end of the harvest does she then go and kind of step it up a notch. And she does that because Naomi tells her, okay, now's the time. Now's the time. The harvest is over. Now is the time to get what she calls I'm looking for, and she says to Ruth, and this again is Naomi's kindness. She's like, I'm looking for a rest for you, Ruth. Ruth's been working harder. I'm looking for a place for you, Ruth, where you can be, right? I'm looking for a place where you can rest and be secure. And so do what I'm telling you now, right? And that's what we're going to be talking about in our next class. Now I see there's a lot of there are comments and questions, so I will address those now. So Susan says, Lahakireni echoes Tamar asking Yehuda, Haker na lemi ele. I mean, I wouldn't say no, because there are absolutely callbacks to Tamar, right? Except that what Tamar does to have her children is kind of illegitimate, and what Ruth does to have, like, in other words, they're both doing things where their husbands are dead and they don't seem to have a prospect of having a child, particularly from the family, and they're taking measures, right? So Tamar takes kind of extreme measures that are on the border of, maybe even past the border of what you would normally think of as acceptable, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Ruth is also working under desperate times call for desperate measures, but she's staying modest and very much listening to what people are telling her to do. So I'm not saying that it's not, so there are absolutely kind of parallels and contrasts there. So I you know, possibly, I'm not sure if I would take that particular verse. You could say that. You could say, well, Boaz is recognizing her in a way that Yehuda did not recognize Tamar when he should have. Right, so that there is absolutely, you know, there is absolutely a kind of an emphasis of Boaz recognizing Ruth, seeing her, understanding what she's done, saying you're someone special, right? And he does, he says that you are, the way you behave and what you are, you're something special, and I recognize that, and because of that, I'm going to make sure that you're okay. And I think it makes it a little bit easier when we think of this kind of relationship lasting through the harvest. It actually makes it easier to understand kind of afterwards, where she's like, okay, you know, marry me now. And he's like, yeah, okay, you know what? That sounds like a good idea, but I have to make sure that it's okay, because there's someone else who has the right first. So Stephen says, Ruth modestly sleeps by Boaz's feet. We're going to come to that next week. Right? It is an issue. It is a problem. She is listening to what Naomi says to her to do. I do think that in the Goren scene, the scene by the threshing floor where she sleeps by his feet, it is meant to there shine a light on how good Boaz is. Because Boaz is in this situation then where he absolutely could have even not illegitimately, he could have kind of sealed the deal, as it were, and said, hey, I'll marry you. And then, but he doesn't. He's like, hey, here's this beautiful young woman. She's lying next to me. I don't have rights. I'm not the guy. I'm not the next one in line. There's another guy in line. So let's make sure that you're okay. Your modesty is preserved, and you'll safely go home in the morning, and we'll do this the right way on the up and up, right? At the same time, yeah, I do think that it is pretty clear. The feet are sexy comment I see. It is absolutely hinting at stuff at the very least that it doesn't necessarily mean, it's not necessarily a euphemism that she's uncovering other things, but just uncovering his toes, right, is and sleeping next to him, his feet, is absolutely kind of a bit of a symbolic statement that's going a little bit almost like it's pretty clear in terms of, hey, I am kind of, this is, like, and what she says, spread your wing over me, like, to take care of me. And the idea is that he's going to marry her, right? And there is absolutely kind of hinting there what marriage includes. And again, I do think that, and we'll talk about this more next week, I do think there is the implication that if he had wanted to, he could have taken things further, but he is an upright man who's doing things the right way, right? And here's this defenseless young woman. He will make sure she's taken care of, but he knows there's someone else in line first, and they have to do this right. So I think, and we'll talk about this more next time. So
just
yes.
One other thing. I think Pasuk Yud Aleph is particularly interesting in the context of the contemporary debate that goes on in Israel between, in terms of Giur Kehalacha, between the Zionist rabbis and the religious and the non-Zionist Haredi rabbis about Giur Kehalacha, because when you look at how Boaz praises Ruth, he praises her for two things. First of all, for her choice of place, for her leaving her country and coming here, and secondly, for her choice of identifying with our people. And no mention of accepting our ways necessarily, or
but at the same time, I mean, there's also this idea that God, that everyone recognizes that, part of that is accepting God, right? Like there's this very clear idea that, and God is going to, that you're essentially putting yourself in God's mercy, and this idea that, I mean, it's hard to say that someone can come to this country and not accept Israel's God, right? And I mean, that is much more like the foreign women that I don't think that the author of Ruth would have been like, oh yeah, she can just join without accepting anything. I think in the reality that Ruth is reflecting, all of these are so intertwined that you can say something like that. You left, and that she said, and that Ruth can say to her mother-in-law, your people are my people, your God is my God. Everything is so connected, the people and the land and God, they're all so interconnected, or they're being presented as they're so inevitably intertwined that someone can do that. If they're not inevitably intertwined, that's when you have this thing of like, oh, she's a foreign woman, why is she here, right? Because she married you, that doesn't mean anything, right? So that's the thing. If you're set, and also, I mean, it's always interesting. And this is an aside, guys, I know, but I heard a lecture about how there's a very different attitude to converts in the Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Talmud, than there is in the Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud has a much more negative view of converts than the Jerusalem Palestinian Talmud does. And one of the explanations given is that in Babylon, Jews did pretty well for themselves. And so converts, there were people who could convert for a reason of, I could be a merchant, I'll have all these connections, it's going to be good for me to convert and join the Jewish people. Whereas in Israel at the time of the Palestinian Talmud, living under Byzantine Christendom, Jews were tremendously persecuted. They were poor. It was hard. And there still were converts. So any convert to that community, you knew that he was real. He was for real, right? Or she was for real. And so they had a much more positive attitude towards converts than Babylonians, who were the Babylonian Jews who were kind of like, he's joining, but I don't really know why. Like, I'm not sure he's for real. And that, if you compare it with the challenge of today's Israel, where, thank God, we live at a time that Israel is a place that people want to move to from certain countries. This is a place where people want to come. And then you've got that whole question. You're like, okay, they're here. Does that mean that they joined because it's better here than where they're coming from, and that's why they're here? Are they actually, do they actually feel connected to the Jewish people? And it's a question. It's not, I'm not saying, oh yeah, no, we have to say they're all no good or whatever. But I'm talking specifically about people, particularly people who are coming more recently from countries where, and I'm not saying don't accept people who are refugees. That's something else, right? I'm saying that there's a reason to say, if you have someone who's a refugee and they're coming here because they're a refugee and they want to live here, and the question is, okay, so they want to live here, do they want to convert? Are they joining us, or are they living in a place that's better for them, right? And then that's one of the things that comes up a lot, I think, in this debate. The whole idea of Torah is that you need, I think, is that you have to have that chesed, you have to have that extra layer of kindness around it. Otherwise, it doesn't work. That's in the Torah itself. And we see it with things like this. And we see it in Ruth so much that for this to work, you have to be kind. You have to have this layer of kindness beyond the law. And I've been in communities that did have that kindness. And I have run from communities that didn't, but I believe when I was living in Kew Garden Hills in Queens, there were several visible converts, right? Like, you could tell they converted because they were converting from different ethnic groups who were absolutely part of the community and absolutely welcomed into the community and a full part of the community. And so it's not just possible, that's what everyone should be doing. And it's sad that people are forgetting that aspect of it. But hopefully, it gives us, what to aspire to, I guess. All right, great. So I'll see everyone next week. Thanks for coming.